All right, so I just had my 40th birthday and I got a request for general life advice. So this will be just general life advice for anyone looking for their way, trying to orient in this crazy world we live in. Okay, so diving right in, there's this depth psychologist I really love, Bill Plotkin, who talks about these two needs that we really need to develop healthily in adolescence. And often if these needs aren't met, what happens is we don't develop properly. We kind of have to go back later in life and try to meet these needs properly. The first is authenticity, like being able to authentically express ourselves. And you may ask, well, what does it mean to authentically express yourself? In this case, it would be just exploring, right? Trying out different things, trying out art, trying out, music, dance, trying out whatever you're interested in, and feeling free to explore, feeling free to try things out. And through this, there's a lot of learning about what resonates with us, what we like, what we don't like. But it's really about giving ourselves permission or feeling free to or courageous enough to really explore self-expression. Now, the second need is to be validated in a group for this, to be a part of a group, to have, peers, a social network that validates you and your self-expression. Now, the problem here is that a lot of social groups can be very judgmental or superficial. They can put a lot of pressure on people to conform to their values and their ideals. And as a result, we end up in this kind of push and pull between these two polarities, between wanting to explore who we are and wanting to try things out and express our truth, whatever that is in the moment, versus wanting to fit in and be liked and be validated. And so it's very common that we end up in this situation where we sacrifice our own truth to feel accepted or a part of a group, because that can feel more essential to our well-being and survival. It's important to have this perspective that we developed for the vast majority of human history in tribes. And in like a tribal environment, fitting in and being a part, feeling like you are accepted by the group was paramount to survival. If you were not accepted by the tribe, if you were to be outcast by the tribe, that would mean death. Because surviving, in the natural world alone, especially as a child or as an adolescent, would be impossible. So it's deeply wired in us to want to be accepted, to want validation from others. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a healthy part of growing up. Now, of course, it can become unhealthy when we start to sacrifice who we are to fit in. And in a lot of cases, that's just the reality of the world we're living in, where there aren't really any social groups around us that will validate and accept us for who we really are. And this is absolutely an ongoing kind of inner struggle we will face in life around wanting to look good to others, wanting to appease others, wanting, status or validation, versus feeling like we need to express ourselves, to be ourselves, to go after what we want in life. And so let me say very clearly here that there's nothing wrong with social validation. We need validation to be healthy, or at least it's an integral part of well-being. Of course, some people can kind of transcend that need, but for most people, we actually need validation. We need to be seen and accepted for who we are. But it's so crucial that we are validated for the right reasons. And that is the key here, is because we can get so far from ourselves, so lost in the world, because we're constantly going after that validation and we're not really honoring who we are. And often we don't even explore and look enough to know who we are. So I think the big piece of advice here is prioritize figuring out who you are. And this idea of who we are can be quite abstract. It's not this very defined thing of who we are. People often talk about this mythopoetic identity, this idea that who we really are can't be put into a rigid or solid identity, and so we can use myth or poetry or poetic type language to kind of point to who we feel we are. I really think of our true selves as something that is unique and also fluid. It's constantly changing and adapting to our environment. And yet there's also something that's really consistent about it, something that is really unique about it, something that is an ongoing discovery. I really think of life as this ongoing discovery of who we are, of exploring, what comes through. That living at its best is a creative act. that we are constantly responding to the environment, to our life circumstances, from a place of authenticity and spontaneity. Meaning we're really being true to ourselves. We're really feeling into, okay, well, what is my truth? What do I feel like I should do in this situation? Where do I feel like I fit into the world or into social groups? And discovering this, like who we are, is really not easy a lot of the time. It's a lifetime journey, right? We often feel this pressure to know who we are by 17, 18, so we can choose a major and, start our career. But that's just not reality. We are so influenced and conditioned by our environment. And so we really have to separate what is the influence of the environment that's impacting me versus who am I really. And this is a really difficult thing to discern at times, trying to figure out what are the values I've adopted, culturally versus my own authentic sense of values. This is why it's really good to get out of our typical environment to help us reflect. When we are in the same environment our whole lives, our patterns, our ways of thinking and seeing the world and seeing ourselves get very ingrained. But when we step outside of our usual environment, when we go somewhere new, when we have new and unique experiences, these take us out of our usual patterns, our usual ways of seeing and thinking, and this opens up so much possibility for insight, for seeing ourselves and the world from a new and truer and more unique or authentic perspective. So one thing that is a kind of a common tradition in a lot of places, in a lot of countries or cultures, is going traveling after school. And I think that's a brilliant practice. I think it's really great to get outside of your normal environment, your normal culture, and to experience other places, other types of cultures and experiences and people. And through that experience, it really kind of opens your mind. And I think everyone can kind of speak to this who's done it, that they come back a little different and a little more knowing themselves, because then you can start to separate what was me versus what was my culture. What is unique to me versus what did I adopt from my culture? Other ways that people have similar types of experiences is, one, meditation retreats. On a meditation retreat, you're taken way outside of your normal environment and you're put to a place where you just really can't escape. You can't distract yourself and you're really just with yourself. And through this being with yourself, a lot of insights and clarity can come to more about who you are, more about what your values are, more about how you want to fit into the world. Another one that has become popular recently is psychedelics. I just started talking about psychedelics on this channel, and I never kind of suggest people do psychedelics. They're really something that you have to be cautious with. You have to use responsibly. You have to know what you're doing. There are so many risks and so many dimensions to doing psychedelics. You really have to do them properly. I think in the right set and setting, when you're mentally prepared, when everything feels good, especially the legal kind of situation, when all that is good, there could be a really high probability of the psychedelics being very helpful. So just know that. Use them responsibly. And I'm absolutely not condoning any breaking of laws. That being said, psychedelics can be extremely mind-opening, where you can see things from a very fresh new perspective, extremely clarifying, where you can see, oh, look at these things I've been engaged with, and those things really aren't good for me. And actually, I think I'd be a lot better off if I pursued this in life. I can't tell you how many people I know who have dramatically changed their lives for the better after using psychedelics. And there is a big warning about this, to take your time, because often with a psychedelic experience, there's a lot of insight that comes in really rapidly, and excitement and energy. And with that, you're like, I want to do all these changes. And often those changes that we want to make right afterwards aren't really grounded in reality, and they might not be the best thing for us long term. So we really want to wait till we come down and slowly, incrementally make changes to our lives, especially anything that is hard to undo. Like, for example, quitting a job or ending a relationship. Those things you should really sit on for a while before you make any rash decisions. And there are also so many more ways in which we can get outside of our normal patterns. We could pick up new hobbies. We could find our way into new social groups. Those things can be very life-changing for people. I know a lot of people, it's just reading books, actually. For me, one of the biggest kind of mind-boggling shifts in paradigm that I had was when I started reading Eastern philosophy, specifically the author Krishnamurti, when I was 18. And that completely changed my worldview, completely changed my life, and really set a direction that was a lot more self-driven. And I'm very grateful for that experience. So yes is really important to do practices or make it a priority to really explore who we are, right? In so many different ways. Journaling, art practice, exploration, reading, all of these ways that we can explore what we're into, what we're not into, and find a more authentic version of ourselves. Now, that being said, there's no rush. And a lot of people think, I'm going to figure out who I am by this age and then I'll be good. And it so rarely works that way. I remember being 29, I was enrolled in a psychotherapy training program, and yet I definitely was not ready to be a psychotherapist at that point, and I really didn't know what I wanted out of life. I had some vague ideas, but I couldn't picture a reality that I really wanted in my future. And I felt, I'm 29. Most people, by their 29, they have a career, blah, blah, blah. And I was telling this to my therapist, who was a phenomenal therapist. She actually now runs the Gestalt Institute of Toronto, because that's where I was doing my training at the time. And she said, oh, come on, don't worry. Nobody knows what they're doing in their 20s. She's like, your 20s is just about trying things out and feeling things out and just figuring out what you want to do. And I can tell you that was kind of a big relief to hear it from someone who I really respected, especially. And I really realized we don't have a lot of good role models in our culture. And she actually asked me, who do you have as a role model? And I could not think of one at the time. And I think that's a big part of why we all feel so lost, is because there's not really people we can look up to that we really respect, that we can kind of model ourselves after. I mean, of course there are. There's lots of great people in the world, but I think there are a very limited set of kind of roles that are celebrated collectively, right? So of course, if you're a famous singer or a famous actor, you're celebrated, you could be thought of as a role model, but most people aren't going to be famous singers and actors, right? And so they're not really role models in the sense of they're not really modeling how we could live as normal people, right? And I think we need more of those, more people that we can look up to that, show us what it is to live a good life. That we don't have to be massively rich or massively successful to have a good life. And what we found actually is that rich and successful people are no happier than regular people. And in fact, regular people who have meaningful work, who feel some sense of meaning in their life, are typically happier than more wealthy and more famous people. So I think this is the other big thing, is that there's so much pressure on us culturally, whether we realize it or not, around achieving something really fantastic, something really big, something we can show off on social media, something we can get all this praise for. And it's not for everyone, right? Not everyone's going to do some big thing. And it's just not a good way of looking at what it means to be human. Being human isn't about doing big things. And we don't have a lot of kind of socially, culturally celebrated models for people who have really done great things, but in very simple ways, right? People who have just been, good parents or good partners or, taking care of their elderly parents. These are good things. These are amazing things that we could do, but they don't build statues to those people. Typically, those people aren't celebrated on the news or, in whatever social media you consume. And so this is really key, is that we have to kind of rewire our brain the way we kind of think about what it means to live a good life or a significant life, away from, social validation, fame, and wealth, and towards meaning, towards what is personally meaningful to me. And you see this all the time, that people become either rich or famous, and then they get really depressed, and then they go and do something completely different. They just kind of drop off and they do something that is more personally meaningful. People often think that because social status and wealth bring a little dopamine hit, they bring some pleasure when you get those things. When you make a post and get a lot of likes, or when you get a raise at a job, or make a bunch of money, there's a dopamine hit. It feels good. And so there's this automatic assumption that, more of this will lead to happiness. If this makes me feel a little bit good, then if I keep getting this, I'll eventually feel really good. But that's just not the case. We get more famous or more validation or more wealth, and we just keep getting these dopamine hits, but we keep coming back to the baseline, the same baseline actually. Over time, those things do not lead to a higher baseline of happiness. Now, of course, with like wealth, there is an increase in well-being up until your needs are met. Your needs are fundamentally met, meaning you're not stressed financially. But once you're no longer stressed financially, more wealth does not make you happier. The other thing is, we idealize happiness, right? And everyone's like, oh, I just want to be happy, or I want you to be happy. And happiness is not like a sustainable state. Maybe for the rare person, or, people who are very ardent spiritual practitioners and, practice many hours a day. But for most people, happiness is not a great goal to have, because you'll always feel inadequate. You'll always feel like I'm not quite there. Many people say, and this is big in existential psychology, existential philosophy, that the goal of life is not happiness, but meaning, to find our own unique meaning, to look at all the potential things we could do, and then to make meaning, to make personal meaning, to find what we find most personally meaningful. And I really think life is a massive exploration to figure that out. And the beauty is that when you start to find meaning in life, and the meaning doesn't have to say consistent, at one point in your life, being a good sibling or being a good friend could be the most meaningful in your life. And then that could change. Your meaning could be oriented more towards the work you're doing. And we don't have to have one meaning in our life. We can have many things that make our life meaningful. But the key here is that it is meaning that carries us forward in life, that carries us through the hardships and the challenges of life, and that we can overcome huge insurmountable challenges if we find them meaningful, right? We can overcome great hardships and endure a lot of pain and suffering if there is some meaning in our lives. This idea is explored to great length in a real landmark book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He survived like 2 years in a concentration camp and, lost his wife and daughter, saw many of his friends and so many other people perish. And he really found that through all of it, what really got people through the hardship was some sense of meaning. And when people didn't have meaning, they would essentially give up on life. And that would make the harsh conditions so much harsher. And this is in the concentration camp specifically, that if they gave up meaning, if they felt like they had no meaning carrying them through that experience, like there was nothing for them on the other side of it, then they would die because they were so malnourished, they were so overworked. But if they had some meaning, that humans could survive insane hardship, that we can be incredibly resilient if we can find meaning in life. And there's this thing that like seeking happiness, we're often actually seeking pleasure. We're seeking things that feel good, but actually don't last and don't lead to any fulfillment. Whereas if we seek meaning, then we will eventually find some level of fulfillment, even if it's not like a full everlasting fulfillment, but we will definitely feel more fulfilled, more grounded in ourselves and more okay with our lives. And that is more likely to lead to happiness and feeling good than pursuing pleasurable experiences. So how do we find what's meaningful? And again, this is, I know it's really difficult for a lot of people because a lot of people are so busy trying to survive in life, trying to, make ends meet, that they don't have the time and resources to explore this, to explore what's personally meaningful. So I know there's kind of a difficult situation that we're all in, some of us more than others, right? And I'm very lucky to have had the resources to pursue what I loved, and not just to pursue what I loved, but to have these passions, to get clear at a relatively young age on what I'm interested in. And a lot of people are my age, right? I'm just turned 40. So a lot of people are 40 and they still don't know what their passion is. They still don't know, what's really calling them in life, what they want to focus or dedicate their energies on. But it's never too late to start exploring these things. And even if we don't have a lot of time or energy to explore, we can still explore. That we all have at least spare time in our heads to be contemplating this, right? We could be doing something else, but be wondering, well, what do I really want to be doing? And a big part of this, and I think the greatest skill we can develop in life, is to be able to listen to the part of ourselves that knows what is best for us. You can call it the true self or the higher self or your most authentic self or your intuition, but it's really that part that knows what is really truly best for us. And we have a lot of other parts in there, right? We may have a part that just wants to feel good all the time, or parts that don't want to take on responsibility. There's a lot in there. So we really have to discern what is really guiding me in my true alignment with like my deepest or most authentic self, and what is just trying to take the easy road or just trying to feel better. An example of this may be you're hungry and you want a snack, and you might be craving ice cream or potato chips, but you also know on some level that those things aren't actually going to make you feel good in the long run, that they're actually not what's best for your body. And so when you tune into your body, sometimes you can feel like, oh no, actually, maybe I just need some water, or, I need like a nice, well-balanced meal. I need some more greens, whatever it is that your body actually needs to be healthy. So it's tuning in to that innate sense of knowing what is best for me. And my mentors, the best mentors I've had phenomenal mentors in my life. And the best ones were always pointing me to that. And I would ask them, well, should I do this or this? They're kind of like, what do you think? And they would kind of guide me to see that I knew what was actually best for myself. And sometimes I would be confused, for sure. Sometimes I'd be like, well, I really want this, or I feel some draw towards this. And they would help me see that often I was pulled by not the forces that are in my best interest. Often I was pulled by fantasies or desires, or wanting to feel important, or wanting to feel seen or validated, versus doing what was really truly aligned for me and really in my best interest. So being able to discern this is something that comes with practice, is something that comes with experience and age and reflection, and making lots of mistakes, and then realizing the mistakes, and then, correcting and trying to do better in the future. That is life. Life is full of mistakes. You could learn, the harder ways or the easier ways, meaning that you can be wise, or at least try to attune to what's best for me, and then make fewer mistakes, and then have, fewer failures to learn from. Or you can just kind of go after everything you want, and then, the mistakes will pile up, and then you will learn, the harder way. So it's always good to reflect, to really try to be honest with ourselves, so we make fewer mistakes. Inevitably, mistakes are always made. That's part of life. And it's actually through a lot of the pain or suffering or challenges in life that we grow and learn. And so this is another big point, is that a lot of learning in life comes through challenge. And often we're trying to get past the challenging point. We just want to get to the other side. But the reality is that, one, challenge makes us thrive and grow. Often when people don't have any challenges in their lives, they end up depressed. People who don't have any meaningful challenge in their life end up dying earlier. This is why people often die after retirement, if they don't have something meaningful to turn to after retirement. And so we want challenges. We just want the right challenges for us. We want the challenges that we're curious about, or that excite us, or that we are just drawn to, something that we really feel like we can engage with and we want to overcome. So taking on challenges means taking on responsibility. And there's this big thing about, responsibility being a very heavy part of life. Like, it's very limiting in some ways. And if you have this goal of freedom, and I just want to be free and have money and be able to do whatever I want, and I don't want any responsibility, those people typically end up very unhappy. They can be living in the nicest, most beautiful homes and traveling the world and having all these really great experiences, but they start to feel very hollow, and they start to feel like they're losing themselves. And we really all need to take on responsibility. Now, if we take on the wrong responsibilities, they'll feel like a prison to us. We will feel so trapped. We will feel like our energy is leaving us. Like we just can't meet life anymore. Like I just don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. And so hopefully we can find our way to taking on the right responsibilities for us eventually, right? Because so much of life is like learning and exploring and trying things out and kind of building to the point where we can be more aligned with ourselves and be more aligned with what challenges and responsibilities we take on. I will say when I was most financially free and had the least amount of responsibility was the most depressed time of my life, when I felt something was fundamentally wrong. It just felt so wrong. My ADHD was terrible. My depression was at an all-time high. And it was when I really went back to school and started to take on more responsibility, started to see a lot of clients and started to do this work that I'm doing now, that all of that lifted and I started to feel better in myself, better in the world, and everything just got better for me, even though I'm not in such a good financial situation as I was before. So there's always a balance. Like, you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to put yourself in like a dangerous situation. You want to try to be responsible to yourself, balance things. But you really do need to explore where you fit into the world, what's most meaningful to you, what responsibilities and challenges you want to take on. Now, this other principle, it's like the doing versus the being, right? So it's like, often we want to do things in life, right? We're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, work my ass off, whatever, 100 hours a week or something crazy and accomplish lots. And we just have this like idea that we just need to constantly be working so much harder than everyone else to be successful. And this is a really kind of toxic idea that you see in so much self-help, you see in all the high achievers, because, we give voice to the people who are high achievers, right? To the best athletes, to the best actors, the people who have really risen to the top of their field. They're inspiring, as they should be. But maybe they don't always give the best advice because they are very unusual people, right? You have to remember this. They are not normal people. If they are, at the very top of their field, if they are the top of like 7 billion people, they are going to be really unique. And I don't think a lot of their advice applies to normal people. Some of it definitely may be inspiring. But this idea of like just pushing yourself so hard all the time, I think is so incredibly unbalanced and usually unhelpful. There are, of course, cases where, if people are being really lazy and just like not getting things going, that stuff can be super helpful to just get you going, to get you off the couch, out in the world, trying new experiences, breaking through whatever inner barriers there were to like, just exploring yourself, exploring the world. Yes, if you want motivation, those things are awesome. But this idea of like work, go, always be managing, always be controlling, it's not healthy. So there's this balance between doing and being, right? And so many of the meditation traditions, that kind of Eastern philosophy, is about being. It's the beauty of being, that so much of our mind is trying to fix problems. They talk about our mind as a problem-solving device, that if our mind doesn't have problems, it will create them. And so much of our life, we're trying to look for problems or trying to create problems or planning for problems. We're having like arguments in our head that are completely pointless, that are never going to happen. But just like, it's like our mind is like playing a simulation and running through all the possibilities of things that could go wrong. And these things are so unhelpful, There's the rare case that these things might be a little helpful, but for the most part, we get stuck too much in this doing. Our mind is constantly trying to fix things that aren't broken. And so it can be really helpful to practice being. Now, on the other hand, too much being of just like, I'm just going to take life as it comes. And then you might just end up, binging Netflix every day and, going on social assistance, whatever. It's like, there is this kind of balance. So you want to reflect on like, what is most important? What are my real values? What do I want to create in my life? And you want to get clear with that intention and look at, what do I need to do to set this in motion, right? And then you want to do that, but then also at the same time, find these moments, find these times where you can just let go and let life just do you, right? Just find this flow. And this is, again, this idea in these Eastern traditions, like, meditation traditions, of just letting life live you, of not overthinking it, of just finding this flow, of letting, things arrange themselves and just going with it. And that doesn't mean you don't act or make changes when necessary, or go after the things you want, or set up boundaries when people are treating you badly. Like, those are all things you absolutely need to be responsive to, right? You need to be present. And in the moment, you got to ask yourself, well, what do I need to do here? Do I need to act, right? You got to tune into that inner intelligence of what is best for me, what is best for the world. It's really exploring these kinds of things. And yet also finding when you can let go, when you don't need to be in control, when you don't need to be thinking or planning, and how much can you just be in the flow of this path. Just set your intention and then trust in this inner guidance system to carry you through the challenges, to carry you through life. Trust that it will bring you in the right direction and that ultimately things will be okay. So another piece of advice here is that whatever problems are arising, there's probably a lot that can be learned from them. So you look at problems as opportunities for learning, and that you can learn experientially from just being present with what's happening. But you can also, go on YouTube and search, how do I deal with this problem? Somebody's intruding on my boundaries. How do I set up boundaries? Whatever it is that you're being challenged with, there is a lesson in it. It is a growth opportunity, and there's a lot of potential for learning. And of course, I am on the extreme end of this, where I love learning this stuff. I'm constantly learning, reading books, watching videos, podcasts, all of that around, life, personal development, psychology, Buddhism, meditation, all of these things. And there's such a wealth of great people out there, a lot of mediocre people, a lot of idealists, unhelpful people as well. So I think discerning from is this person really someone I can look to and trust for guidance, but then more so feeling into your own truth, right? So we learn from outside, we learn from others. I've learned so much from the mentors I've had in person, but also all the books I've read, all the podcasts, all of that. But ultimately, we have to trust our own experience. We can never, ever kind of override our own sense of what's best for ourselves because someone else tells us something. And this is what one of my mentors really instilled in me when I was really questioning, should I do this? Because maybe, and then she was just no, you can never, ever take any guidance from outside that overrides your inner guidance, right? And so this was particularly actually with a psychedelic experience when a vision came and I was like, is that true? And should I do that? And she was like, no, don't, your own inner sense in this moment of what is right for you is more meaningful and more powerful and more grounded than your vision. Your vision could be interpreted a million different ways because you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know if it's some weird part of your psyche that's manifesting that doesn't actually know what's best for you. It could be a secret desire you have or yada, yada, right? There's all sorts of things it could be. So you always have to come back to this inner mature adult, this part of ourselves that really knows what's best for us and not put all this weight on other people that we may trust or admire or look up to. Of course, other people can be so supportive and so helpful and, we could learn an immense amount. We can get awesome guidance from others if they are the right people, but they can also lead us incredibly astray. I've seen this over and over in so many spiritual communities and so many, all sorts of communities where people will idolize the leader and then the leader will ultimately lead them off their own life path and they will, end up in all sorts of situations and ultimately learn lessons the hard way, which you want to avoid as much as possible. And then the last piece I'll say, and this comes back to the thing of meaning, is that I really strive for a reciprocal relationship with the world, meaning I'm receiving what I need from the world in many forms. The love and care I get from my friends and family, the food I get from the world, the shelter, everything. There's so much that I receive, but then I also give, right? The work I do with clients, the work I do here, it's this give and take relationship. And I think that if we're only receiving, because we're all receiving in some way from the world, but if we're only receiving and we're not also giving something meaningful to the world, then we may feel this out of balance. We may feel a sense of lostness. So if you're looking for something meaningful, look how you can give, how you can contribute to the collective good. Because that, I think, is naturally what we're supposed to do. When we live in these small tribal communities like we have for most of human history, we have a role. We know what we're contributing to the collective. But I think that's been lost in our kind of globalized world in the way that we've lived for, the past few hundred years. Communities have mostly broken down. So I think finding a sense of community, finding people you can relate to care for, or even just in the simplest way, just being present with them, listening to what they're saying, that's meaningful. That offers care. It's that impacts people, feeling like they're connecting with someone else, feeling like they're being seen and heard. It's awesome to feel seen and heard. If all you do is make people feel seen and heard, you're doing good in the world, right? So it can be very simple in that way. So it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing. And in fact, often the grandiose stuff just serves to disconnect us. It serves to make us feel more distant from others, more separate. Whereas the more humble things, working with people directly, being with people in simple ways often makes us feel more connected, more a part of the world. And with everyone feeling so isolated these days, I feel like this is what we really need, is more community, more people coming together in meaningful ways, sharing meaningful experiences. There are so many varieties and ways that we can do this, so it's really up to you to find what's resonant. So I think that's it for now. I think I covered a lot in this video. I'm really curious what you have to say about this and what you might find meaningful, or if you have any questions. I also write a lot about this kind of stuff on my Substack, so check out my Substack, link in the description. There'll be a link to sign up for my newsletter too, all that. So thank you. You can like and subscribe if you haven't already, and appreciate you, and see you next time.